Near the tail end of 2017, after I'd finished up my first semester at Clemson, I was able to spend time with family in Nashville for Christmas. We primarily stayed with my older sister and her husband at their apartment, and during that time together we were able to cook, bake, play, explore, eat, and generally have a great time with one another. However, in the midst of all this holiday spirit, one thing stood out to me that just kind of took me out of it. And that's this. Now, back in 2015, I had decided that I wanted to make a Christmas present for Jackson, who at the time was just Savannah's boyfriend. I knew that he liked Pokemon, and after being told that he liked Pikachu, I decided that I was fully capable of carving him a three-dimensional version of that creature. Oh, how wrong I was. Now, I don't think I did a terrible job, and sure, it's got its charm, but you don't have to be a fan of the source material to tell that what I carved didn't fully resemble that beloved electric rodent. So when I saw that little sculpture again, I felt like I needed to redeem myself and make Jackson a new and improved gift. After all, the quality in my artwork had gotten fairly decent since working on that shoe, and I was dead set on making sure that this was not my legacy. The question then arose, what was something that Jackson liked that could be the subject for this upcoming project?
Pizza! P-I-Z-Z-A. I want pizza! Is it finally done? Hooray!
Oh yeah, right. After getting back from Nashville, I started planning out how this whole operation would come together. Jackson's birthday was about a month away, and I knew I needed to get it started as soon as I could. I determined that a wooden cross-section could serve as the artwork's base, and all I needed to do was find some way of placing John's mustachioed face on top of it. At first, the idea was to do a relief carving into the wood, but after considering how contrast is the preeminent artistic feature of the Pizza John, I decided that wood burning would be the best course to take. After acquiring the wood slice from Amazon, which is now saved as one of the search results for that site, I printed out a picture of this meme? And used a bunch of push pins to transfer the image of John's face onto its surface. After the image had been transferred, I began working on the wood burning process in my dorm room. But once I realized how much smoke was being generated by doing this, and thinking how I could possibly be responsible for a building evacuation, I decided that it would be best to relocate to a rocking chair situated on the porch outside of my residence hall. After putting on winter clothes and packing up my lamp, I finally found myself working on the project right here. I listened to the podcast Stuff You Should Know while I worked in 30 to 40 degree temperatures, and when I had finally finished, it had taken me this long. Yeah. It certainly was an arduous process of repeated burnings and ensuring I didn't accidentally mess anything up. And when I finished, I wasn't entirely satisfied with how some of the lettering turned out and the fact that you could still see some of the pushpin markings, but I was overall pleased with the end product. Now all I had to do was send it to Jackson, along with just a couple other items.
Kevin, I already opened the tape because I thought I was gonna make things quicker, but then I saw there were memes. So that
Oh my god.
There are memes.
Hey Patrick, I thought of something funnier than 24.
Let me hear it.
25. Oh my! Do you know what he was working on?
Yes.
Oh no! Did he do a thing?
So you've seen it.
Just look at it. Don't ask me questions. I know too much.
Oh my god!
Gosh!
That's wonderful.
I want to do something to earn your affection like this.
You have to marry.
You have to marry into it.
He's got one
Cassie's
more.
still available. No.
Wow. Yeah. We'll need to find a place. Where does he get all this wood?
After finishing up my first year at Clemson, I stayed in South Carolina with my mom and my little sister for about a week before I went to go stay with Savannah and Jackson in Nashville for the summer. During the time I was in South Carolina, I spent a few days working on a carving for Cassie's birthday, since she was the only person in my immediate family who hadn't made anything for yet, and she was very vocal about that fact. That project ended up draining me a bit though, so I took a break from doing anything crafty for a while. But when Savannah and Jackson's first anniversary eventually came and went, I decided I wanted to jump back in and make something for them. While they are away in Seattle to celebrate their first year together, I was going to paint a belated birthday gift for Savannah as well as for their anniversary. However, when the time came, I just struggled to have any energy or even the mindset to paint something that I liked, and I ended up abandoning that idea entirely. Yet, as my inevitable return to Clemson for RA training grew nearer and nearer, I felt like I needed to do something for their anniversary. But if I was going to make something for them, I wanted it to serve a practical purpose on top of being an artistic endeavor. and luckily for me, I knew exactly what could work for that. Many comments were made that summer on how ineffective their current trash can was, and how its lid continually fell into the container and made it difficult to handle. And it was expressed a couple times that they were looking to get a new one. Well, near the end of summer, we went to a Target to stock up on things that I might need for my coming school year, as well as anything else that might be needed, and I ended up bringing them both to the trash can section and asked them to pick one out. I told them that this was my anniversary gift to them, but made no indication that this was going to be altered in any way. Initially, I considered the idea of putting a pair of orcas or penguins on the container, but then I imagined what John would look like with a banana on his head, and I said, yeah, I want to do that. It took me a little bit of research to figure out how I was going to do this and to find the perfect banana to set atop John's head. I'm fully convinced I found the perfect model to help. But once I was finished with the design, all I had to do was print it out with the help of my supervisor. I tried to make sure I was using as little ink as possible by inverting the colors of the design and erasing away as much material as I could while still retaining the lines needed for the cutout, which totally upped the creepy factor. And once I had everything together, I was ready to get started. The original plan was that I was going to lay a sheet of painter's tape down on a pizza box, cut it out with a box cutter, and transfer the design onto the trash can. However, after laying down the sheet of tape onto the cardboard, I realized how much more incredibly easy it would be to cut out the middleman and just lay the tape sheet directly onto the trash can. Once I made that vital switch, I glued the stencil where I wanted it, and then immediately realized I had no idea where my box cutter was. I looked around for a bit, but after not finding it, I spent like an hour trying to figure out what I was going to do. I had specifically taken this day off from my job so that I could work on this project, and it was the only time that I'd be able to work on it since we'd be leaving for Clemson the following day. I began to think that I was going to have to leave this half-finished project abandoned too, until I realized that I had my carving tools with me. As soon as I pulled those suckers out, we were back in business and I began to trace out my design. After pulling off the excess tape, I took a second to marvel at the fact that this thing was actually coming together. I ended up including the Nerdfighter crest on the lid, which was a little tricky to cut out, but was ultimately a satisfying inclusion. I then took the trash can to the balcony and covered it with about 2 coats of matte black spray paint, and once finished, I waited for it to dry. Jackson eventually came home from work first and needed to join a conference call in the room that looks directly at the balcony. I made sure that the blinds to the room were shut beforehand, and once he was in his meeting, I took the now dried trash can to the bathroom where I proceeded to peel away the tape. Now let me tell you, there's nothing more satisfying than peeling away painter's tape and seeing how it performed its job perfectly. This was just so fun to look at. I then placed it in the shower behind the curtain and waited for Savannah to show up. When Savannah came back and Jack was done with his meeting, Savannah eventually asked me where the trash can had gone since it had been previously left out. I told her I'd go get it, and on my way back I instructed that they both close their eyes. I then presented my work to them, and needless to say, I think it was a hit. Now every time I go to their apartment, I'm greeted with 2 sets of those wonderful Big Brother eyes. By this point, I was well into my 3rd semester at Clemson. Most of my classes were manageable, the RA life was working out, and I was living in constant fear that statics and dynamics was going to decapitate my 4.0 GPA. However, in the midst of all of this, the mechanical engineering department was promoting their annual pumpkin carving party. Families and students could come together to snack, carve, and have a fun time as a way to unwind and take a break from schoolwork. When I heard about this event, I knew that there were ultimately 2 different paths that I could take. One where I carved something new and creative, and one where I carved Pizza John. I'm guessing you can tell which one I chose. It took a little bit of time to decide what the word would be for this one, but after texting Savannah and Jackson, I eventually settled with one that we could all agree on. When I got to the event, I had the intention of just freehanding John's face with the provided supplies, but it turns out that grocery store pumpkin carving tools can't really do detailed work all that well, and trying to copy John's face without any sort of template proved to be practically impossible for me to do accurately. After realizing how blind my confidence had made me, I asked someone there to watch my pumpkin while I biked back to my dorm room to pick up my carving tools and print out a picture of Pizza John. When I got back to the event, I wasn't entirely sure how this process would go, since I'd never carved a pumpkin this way before. But it turns out, pumpkins are one of the best mediums I've ever used because my carving tools went through it just like butter. The longest portion of this whole process was actually just translating John's face onto the pumpkin, which took so long to do that by the time I had actually finished the carving, the event had already ended. However, if I hadn't ended up staying that late, I never would have had a conversation with my ME sophomore seminar professor and learned that pumpkin carving is actually one of his hobbies. So, yeah. Once I did finish, I helped move some of the tables that were used for the event back into storage, and had the photographer ask for a picture of me holding my jack-o'-lantern. I actually had no idea where all of these pictures had gone until writing this, and when I eventually found where they were, I was pleasantly surprised to see that John's face was the cover photo for this event's album. I ended up leaving the carving with the others overnight, but eventually took it back to my dorm where I prominently displayed it in my window, and when I did finally have to throw it away, I got to see a familiar image. Thank you for watching and enduring whatever this turned out to be. If you're unfamiliar with Pizza John, you should check out the link in the description to learn more about this mustachioed face. If you are familiar with Pizza John, then you should definitely tweet this video at John or Hank or something. I need the validation. And finally, if you're wondering why this video was posted on June 28th, well, initially I was wanting to post it on March 14th, or as we know it as Pi Day, because, you know, pizza pie, but it ended up not working out that great with my schedule. So instead, I chose June 28th because 6.28 is 2 pi. And now we've come full circle. Okay, bye.